I used to think the most compelling men were those who never seemed to care. But then I realized, what if that non-care is just emotional camouflage? What if beneath the surface there's something more meaningful going on? Today, let's peel back that camouflage and ask, do women really prefer men who don't care? Or are we just mistaking safety for indifference? There's something almost magnetic about the person who seems just out of reach. You know, the type, the one who doesn't text right back, who doesn't wear their heart on their sleeve, who carries themselves with a kind of air that says, I'm fine with or without you. At first glance, it feels alluring. It looks like confidence. It looks like strength. It even looks like freedom. And for many people, that pull towards someone who seems a little emotionally detached can feel irresistible. But if you look closer, what we often find is that this allure is deceptive. Because what we're mistaking for confidence is frequently something else entirely. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's protection, and sometimes it's an armor so thick that intimacy has a hard time getting through. Think about what happens when you first meet someone who feels a little emotionally distant. There's a spark, right? You find yourself leaning in, trying to figure them out. It's human nature. We want what feels scarce. We're curious about what's not being revealed. When someone is warm and available right away, it can feel almost too easy. But when someone is withholding, it activates a kind of puzzle in our minds. We think if I can just get them to Kari, then I'll know I'm really special. Suddenly, the chase itself becomes intoxicating. But notice what's happening here. The focus shifts away from whether this person is actually a good partner, whether they can offer consistency or kindness, whether their values align with ours. Instead, it becomes about solving the puzzle. Why stop asking the essential questions and start asking, how do I get them to show me more? And that's where the deception begins, because underneath the surface, emotional detachment isn't usually about power. It's about protection. It comes from life experiences, old wounds, disappointments, or fears of rejection. People learn early on that if they don't show too much, they can't get hurt as much. If they don't depend on others, the psychology of emotional detachment, they can't be let down. If they withhold affection, they'll never have to feel the sting of it being taken away. So what looks alluring is often just a survival strategy. And when you build a relationship with someone whose main coping mechanism is emotional distance, the beginning can feel thrilling, but over time it tends to feel confusing, frustrating, and even painful. You start to wonder, why do I feel like I'm doing all the work? Why am I always waiting for breadcrumbs of attention? Why does closeness feel like it's always on their terms? What makes this so tricky is that emotional detachment wears the costume of confidence, that coolness, that sense of independence. It can look like strength, but true confidence isn't about withholding. True confidence is about being secure enough to be both independent and connected. It's about being able to say, I don't need you to complete me, but I value you enough to let you in. The deceptive part is that when someone doesn't care or appears not to care, we sometimes project qualities onto them that may not actually exist. We tell ourselves, he must be really self-assured to act like that, or she must have so many options. No wonder she's not rushing toward me. We fill in the gaps with our own imagination, mistaking the absence of attention for the presence of strength. This illusion can also trigger something powerful emus, the desire to prove ourselves. When someone holds back, we want to win them over. We chase validation. It becomes less about building a genuine bond and more about securing their approval. That's not attraction. That's anxiety. That's the nervous system mistaking the push-pull dynamic for chemistry. But chemistry built on anxiety rarely leads to the kind of love people actually want. It leads to drama, to guessing games, to long nights staring at your phone waiting for a message that might not come. And yet, because the highs are so high when that emotionally detached person finally throws us a scrap of attention. It keeps us hooked. The cycle becomes addictive, just enough warmth to keep you coming back, but not enough to make you feel secure. If we step back and ask ourselves what we truly long for in a relationship, very few of us would say, I want someone who keeps me guessing all the time. What we usually want is consistency. We want care. We want safety. We want passion, yes, but not at the cost of peace. And yet, because emotional detachment masquerades as strength, we sometimes mistake it for what we actually desire. Let's take a closer look at why this happens. For many people, the attraction to emotionally available doesn't come out of nowhere. It often mirrors something familiar from the past. If you grew up in a family where love felt conditional, where attention was sporadic, or where you had to work hard to be noticed, then someone who does out affection unpredictably might feel strangely comfortable. It may not feel good, but it feels familiar. And the psyche is drawn to what it recognizes. That's why emotional detachment can feel so magnetic in the beginning. It lights up those old circuits. It feels like home, even if home wasn't always healthy. And unless we recognize that pattern, we'll keep chasing the very thing that leaves us unfulfilled. But here's the hopeful part. Once you see through the deception, you can choose differently. You can start to recognize that real why over-investing backfires confidence doesn't pull away. It leans in. Real strength doesn't avoid vulnerability. It embraces it. That people who seem the most self-assured are often the ones who aren't afraid to care. They don't need to play games because they know their value doesn't diminish just because they show affection. Think about how different it feels to be with someone who is emotionally present. Someone who doesn't make you earn every drop of attention, but instead offers it freely because they know that love is not a scarce resource. Instead of keeping you guessing, they reassure you. Instead of holding back, they lean in. That doesn't make them weak. It makes them trustworthy. It makes them someone you can build a life with. What's fascinating is that when you actually experience a relationship like that, the allure of emotional detachment begins to fade. You realize that what you thought was confidence was actually avoidance. What you thought was strength was really fear. And what you thought was attraction was just anxiety in disguise. Of course, it takes work to shift this pattern. Because if you've been drawn to emotionally detached partners for a long time, being with someone secure might initially feel boring. That steady availability might lack the drama of the chase. But boredom isn't what's really happening. It's peace. And peace can take time to get used to. If chaos has been your normal, the deception of emotional detachment lies not only in how we perceive others, but also in how we perceive ourselves. When we're drawn to people who hold back, it can reflect our own ambivalence about intimacy. Maybe part of us is afraid of being fully seen too. Maybe part of us likes the safety of a partner who won't get too close, because it means we don't dare to get too close either. It's worth asking, if I'm repeatedly attracted to people who don't care, what part of me is more comfortable with distance than with closeness? The truth is, relationships are always reciprocal. If we consistently find ourselves pulled toward the detached, we have to examine the ways we might be emotionally unable too. That's not about blame. It's about insight. Because once you understand your own patterns, you can make choices that align with what you genuinely want instead of what feels familiar. And here's the biggest lesson. Caring isn't weakness. Caring is courage. It takes far more strength to show up, to be vulnerable, to let someone matter to you than it does to stay detached. Emotional distance may look alluring, but in the end, it's that person who can care openly without fear of losing themselves, who creates the kind of love most people are searching for. So yes, emotional detachment can catch our eye. It can create an initial spark, but if you look beneath the surface, you'll see that what's truly compelling isn't the absence of care but the presence of it. Because at the end of the day, the relationships that last, the ones that nourish us, the ones that help us grow, those aren't built on distance, they're built on presence. And that's why the allure of emotional how indifference creates attraction detachment. While tempting at first, is ultimately deceptive. What looks like power is usually protection. What looks like freedom is often fear. And what looks like strength is in reality avoidance. True strength, the kind that sustains intimacy, isn't about how well you can wall yourself off. It's about how bravely you can let someone in. There's this quiet misconception floating around in our culture that attraction is about the flashiest display, the cleverest line, or the biggest performance of strength. We often assume people are drawn to aloofness, mystery, or the chase. But when you strip away the games, the strategies, the rules people try to follow in dating, what you see at the heart of true attraction is something much simpler. It's kindness, not kindness that bends over backward or kindness that sacrifices itself to be liked, but kindness paired with confidence. Kindness that isn't desperate, that doesn't need to prove itself, that comes from a place of self-respect as much as respect for the other person. When we think about what sustains interest beyond the first spark, it's rarely arrogance or indifference. Those qualities might catch attention in the beginning because they create drama. But drama doesn't keep us warm at night. What keeps us warm is a steady presence, someone who can be generous without being swallowed, someone who can offer care without losing themselves. Confidence without kindness can feel intimidating. Kindness without confidence can feel insecure. But the two together, that's where the magic is. It's easy to forget that attraction is about how someone makes us feel in their presence. When you're with someone who is kind, you feel seen. You feel valued. There's a softness in how they interact with you that makes you relax. But if that kindness isn't backed by confidence, it can feel like they're giving to you out of fear. Fear of losing you. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if they don't please you, they won't be chosen. And when you sense that fear, the dynamic shifts. It doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like caretaking or worse, manipulation disguised as generosity. Now think about confidence without kindness. The person who walks into the room and commands attention. The one who never seems nervous, who radiates certainty. That can be attractive at first because it feels like stability. But when confidence stands alone without warmth, it veers into arrogance. It becomes about them instead of about us. You might admire their self-assurance, but over time you'll notice the absence of care. You'll notice that you don't feel nourished, that their certainty comes at the expense of connection. But when you meet someone who has both, when their confidence allows them to show kindness without fear of being taken advantage of, and when their kindness grounds their confidence so it doesn't turn into arrogance, you feel safe and excited at the same time. You feel challenged, but also cared for. You sense that they know their worth, but they also recognize yours. That combination creates an equilibrium in which attraction can not only spark, but endure. A lot of people confuse attraction with tension. They think if there isn't some level of uncertainty or anxiety, it's not real. But actually, lasting attraction grows strongest in spaces where people can let their guard down. Kindness invites that vulnerability. Confidence protects it. Kindness says, I see you. Confidence says, and I don't lose myself in the process. What's interesting is that the difference between confidence and arrogance, this combination doesn't always shout. It doesn't always look like the person in the spotlight. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the person who listens intently, who offers generosity without strings, who doesn't crumble if you disagree with them, who doesn't need to dominate a conversation to feel important. There's a sturdiness in that kind of person that draws you in because it feels real. It feels dependable, and dependable doesn't mean boring. It means you can trust that the person will be the same tomorrow as they are today. That's what allows attraction to deepen. The kindness and confidence balance also redefines us how we see strength. A lot of people assume strength means not needing anyone, not showing vulnerability, not giving too much. But genuine strength is the opposite. It's shaving the courage to open up while still standing firmly in who you are. It's being able to care deeply while also being able to say no. It's generosity that comes from abundance, not from fear of scarcity. When you're with someone like this, you notice how steady they are. They don't panic if you need space. They don't crumble if you set a boundary. They don't smother you to keep you close. Their confidence allows them to trust the connection. And their kindness makes you want to lean into it. That's why it feels so magnetic. It gives you both freedom and closeness, both security and passion. But let's also be honest. A lot of people struggle to embody both at once. Some people lean heavily on kindness, hoping it will be enough. But without confidence, it tips into people-pleasing. Others lean heavily on confidence, thinking that's the key. But without kindness, it turns cold and self-absorbed. It's the combination that makes attraction feel both steady and alive. This combination also helps us distinguish between infatuation and real connection. Infatuation feeds on extremes. It thrives on mystery, chase, and intensity. But connection grows where there is balance. When someone shows kindness with confidence, it creates space for the relationship to grow naturally instead of burning out quickly. You're not left wondering if their affection is real because their confidence makes it clear they're not giving it out of neediness. You're not worried their confidence is masking disinterest because their kindness makes it clear they care. And isn't that what most people are ultimately searching for? That balance of being cared for without being controlled, being admired without being objectified, being loved without being smothered. Attraction isn't just about finding someone who excites you. It's about finding someone who excites you while also grounding you. There's another layer here too. When someone offers kindness with confidence, it awakens the same qualities in us. We start to feel more confident in our own kindness. We stop worrying about whether giving will make us look weak, and instead we realize that offering warmth is an extension of our own strength. Relationships built on this dynamic create a kind of upward spiral. You bring out the best in each other instead of the most defensive parts of each other. The truth is, most of us want to feel cared for without feeling controlled. And we want to feel admired without feeling like we're on a pedestal. That's what kindness with confidence does. It keeps things grounded. It keeps things real. It says, I see your flaws and your strengths, and I care about both, and I know who I am well enough not to be shaken by self-respect as the ultimate. That. Sometimes people think this balance sounds ordinary, like it doesn't have the fire of more chaotic dynamics. But what they don't realize is that chaos isn't fire. It's smoke. It's confusion masquerading as chemistry. Fire that truly lasts is built on steady fuel. And the steady fuel in relationships is this very balance. Kindness that makes you feel safe. Confidence that makes you feel secure. Over time, the couples who thrive are rarely the ones who started with the most dramatic beginnings. They're the ones who discovered a partner they could both admire and rely on. Someone who made them feel cherished without being overrun, supported without being controlled, someone who cared enough to show up and strong enough to stand tall. So when we talk about attraction, it's worth asking ourselves, are we chasing what looks shiny in the short term? Or are we choosing what actually sustains us in the long run? Because the people who combine kindness with confidence might not always be the loudest, but they are the ones who make us feel both alive and secure. And that is the kind of attraction that lasts. We've all heard the phrase, nice guys finish last. It's repeated so often, it almost sounds like it shows up in sitcom punchlines, in frustrated dating conversations, in self-help forums where people are trying to decode why relationships keep slipping away. And at first the idea seems to make sense. You look around and see people drawn to partners who aren't necessarily the most thoughtful, the most giving, or the most attentive. You see someone being overlooked despite being kind, and you start to believe the story. Maybe being too nice really is the problem, but there's the truth. The nice guy myth oversimplifies human attraction. It takes a very complex mix of psychology, biology, and emotional history and reduces it to a single misleading soundbite. It's not that kindness isn't attractive. It's not that generosity pushes people away. What actually happens is that the way niceness gets expressed often carries undertones that people pick up on. Undertones of insecurity, self-sacrifice, or a hidden expectation of reward. An attraction is sensitive to those undertones. When people say, nice guys finish last, what they're often describing isn't genuine kindness. They're describing a kind of transactional niceness, a way of giving that comes with an agenda. You can feel it when someone is doing something thoughtful, not because it flows naturally from who they are, but because they hope it will earn them affection, validation, or attention in return. The words are kind, the gestures are kind, but the energy behind them feels pressured. It doesn't feel like generosity. It feels like bargaining. And here's the thing about attraction, it's intuitive. We might not be able to articulate exactly why someone doesn't spark that feeling in us, but our bodies know. We sense when kindness is rooted in strength versus when it's rooted in fear. We sense when someone is offering what women subconsciously test in Mankari because they have it to give or because they're trying to secure a place in our lives. And when the care feels like a strategy, it tends to have the opposite effect of what was intended. That's where the oversimplification of myth comes in. It isn't that people don't want kindness. It's that they don't want kindness without confidence. They don't want a partner whose entire identity is built on meeting their needs while neglecting their own. They don't want someone whose acts of generosity feel like a plea for worthiness. They want kindness that comes from self-respect, not self-eraser. Let's take a step back and look at what we actually know about attraction. Time and, again, studies show that people are drawn to partners who are warm, empathetic, and supportive. But those same studies show that these qualities are most attractive when paired with traits like confidence, independence, and assertiveness. Kindness on its own isn't the problem. The problem is when kindness comes across as passivity, as a lack of agency, as someone who doesn't know how to say no. Think about it. When someone agrees with everything you say, bends to every preference you have, never challenges you, never asserts their own needs, it might feel flattering at first, but over time it becomes unsatisfying. Relationships thrive on mutuality. They thrive when two people bring their full selves into the connection. And someone who is nice in the sense of being endlessly accommodating doesn't bring their full self. They bring a muted, edited version of themselves. That's not intimacy. That's performance. This is why the nice guy myth is so misleading. It tricks people into thinking their kindness is the problem, when in reality, it's the lack of authenticity behind that kindness. What gets overlooked in the myth is the role of selfhood. Real attraction isn't about pleasing the other person at all costs. It's about showing who you are, your desires, your boundaries, your quirks, your opinions, while also being considerate and respectful. And here's the irony. The people who call themselves too nice are often not actually being nice to themselves. They're so focused on pleasing others that they neglect their own needs. They compromise too much. They silence their frustration. They hide their disappointments. And then when resentment builds because the relationship doesn't reciprocate the way they hoped, their kindness suddenly turns sharp. The very thing they offer in abundance starts to feel conditional. The unspoken expectation comes crashing into the open. After everything I did for you, why don't you love me back the way I want? That's not kindness. That's martyrdom. And martyrdom doesn't spark attraction. It sparks guilt or distance or both. Now compare that to someone who is kind but grounded. Someone who listens, who's attentive, who notices the small details that matter to you, but who also expresses their own needs. Someone who's generous, but not because they're afraid of losing you if they're not. Someone who knows that saying no doesn't make them unkind. It makes them honest. That's a completely different why emotional independence is powerful in G. That's the kind of niceness that actually draws people in because it feels genuine and it feels sustainable. The oversimplification of the nice guy myth also erases another important truth. Attraction isn't just about personality traits. It's about timing, readiness, and individual patterns. Sometimes a person isn't drawn to kindness because they've learned to equate love with drama. Sometimes they're chasing unresolved wounds from their past. Sometimes they're not in a place where they can even recognize healthy affection for what it is. To blame niceness for every rejection is toying near all the layers of complexity that shape why we choose who we choose. It's also worth noticing that nice guys finish last tends to be a narrative that comes from disappointment, from repeated rejection. It's a story people tell themselves to explain a painful pattern. And while it can feel comforting to put the blame on being too nice, it actually robs people of the opportunity to look deeper. It prevents them from asking harder, more fruitful questions like, am I being kind because I want to or because I'm afraid not to? Am I showing up as my full self or just the parts I think will be accepted? Am I treating my own needs as worthy of respect? Or am I erasing them and hope someone else will finally validate me? When you ask those questions, you start to see that the problem isn't niceness. It's the absence of wholeness, because real attraction is never about one trait in isolation. It's not just about being nice or just about being confident or just about being funny. It's about the integration of qualities. It's about how warmth is balanced with strength, how generosity is balanced with self-respect, how vulnerability is balanced with boundaries. So if you're someone who has felt defeated by the nice guy's finish last story, it might be time to reframe. Instead of trying to be less nice, the challenge is to be more authentic, to bring kindness that doesn't erase you, to offer generosity without hidden contracts, to pair empathy with a backbone. Because that combination is not just attractive, it's irresistible. And here's the final point. People don't fall in love with niceness. They fall in love with people, with the way you see the world, the way you make them laugh, the way you challenge them, the way you stand beside them in hard moments. Niceness is one piece of that, but only when it's tethered to a sense of self. The nice guy myth oversimplifies this rich, nuanced reality into a black and white story. But real attraction lives in the gray. It lives in the places where kindness meets confidence, where generosity meets authenticity, where care meets strength. So no, nice guys don't finish last. But people who hide behind niceness, who use it as a mask instead of a mirror of who they really are might. Because what people are looking for isn't just nice. They're looking for someone real, someone who knows how to give, but also how to be. Someone who understands that attraction isn't about finishing first or last. It's about showing up fully as yourself and letting the connection grow from there. There's a certain appeal to the person who seems untouchable, the one who shrugs when plans fall through, who doesn't seem overly invested, who always appears calm, collected, and unaffected. To the outside world, that looks like a confidence. It looks like strength. It looks like freedom from the mesalliances of needing anyone too much. And yet, when you really sit with it, that indifference you think you're seeing often isn't indifference at all. More often than not, it's a kind of self-pee protection. Because here's the thing, people rarely become detached without arrogance. We aren't born with walls around our hearts. We build them sometimes brick by brick, sometimes all at once after a painful experience. And what looks like I don't care is very often I can't risk caring again because caring has cost me too much in the past. If you've ever encountered someone like this, you probably know the push-pull feeling that comes with it. On one hand, their calm distance feels intriguing. You wonder what's going on behind the how to balance caring and not caring curtain. You want to get closer. You want to be the person who breaks through. On the other hand, there's this constant ache of not quite reaching them. They give enough to keep you around, but not enough to let you all the way in. And if you ask them directly, they'll likely brush it off. It's nothing. I'm just easygoing. I'm fine. But fine is usually the cover story. Indifference is the mask. And underneath, there's a long history of what it took to make someone believe that needing others was unsafe. Maybe they grew up in a home where their feelings were minimized or ignored, so they learned not to show too much. Maybe they loved deeply once and were betrayed, so they told themselves never again. Maybe life gave them too many reminders that closeness comes with pain, and distance felt like the only way to stay safe. The tricky part is that self-P protection works, at least in the short term. When you don't let people in, you can't be as easily hurt. When you convince yourself you don't care, the disappointments sting less. But the cost of that protection is that it also blocks out the good stuff. You can't selectively numb feelings. If you wall yourself off from pain, you inevitably wall yourself off from joy too. So while indifference can look alluring from the outside, living inside of it often feels lonely. It's not the serenity it seems. It's more like living in a fortress you built to keep out enemies, only to realize it also keeps out friends, love, warmth, and intimacy. And the person wearing that mask may not even realize how thick the walls have become. Because over time, the mask starts to feel like part of their skin. This is where many relationships get tangled. One person feels drawn in, compelled by the challenge of getting past the walls, while the other is holding those walls up out of habit, fear, or survival. It creates a cycle offer suit and retreat. The more one chases, the more the other distances. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. What complicates this further is how our culture often words that appearance of indifference. We associate it with power, with coolness, with mystery. We think the one who cares less holds the upper hand. But let's be honest, is it really power if it's built on fear? Is it strength if it's motivated by the avoidance of vulnerability? Or is it simply protection that's doing its job so well it ends up suffocating the very connection we crave? If you peel back the mask, what you often find is not a lack of feeling, but an overabundance of it. People who seem indifferent are often the ones who feel the most deeply. They've just decided those feelings aren't safe to show. So they hide them behind sarcasm, behind aloofness, behind the story that they're not looking for anything serious. And while that might shield them from rejection in the moment, it also prevents the possibility of being chosen for who they really are. It's important to recognize that this isn't malicious. It isn't about playing games or deliberately withholding. It's a boot fair. Sometimes fear so deep that even the person experiencing it doesn't fully recognize it. To admit you're protecting yourself would mean admitting you want connection. And for someone who's built their identity on not needing anyone, that admission feels terrifying. So what do we do with this? If you're the person on the outside drawn to someone who seems detached, it helps to remember that their distance isn't about your worth, it's about their armor. And no matter how much you want to, you can't force someone to take their armor off. They have to decide it's safe. They have got to decide that intimacy is worth the risk. And that decision comes only when they realize that safety doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. And if you're the one who recognizes yourself in this description, it might be worth asking, what is my indifference really protecting me from? What am I afraid if I let someone see? Hidden reason she pulls closer, how much I care? What old wounds am I carrying that convince me vulnerability is dangerous? These aren't easy questions, but they're the ones that shift the story. Because self-P protection can only take you so far before it becomes self-imprisonment. The irony is that the very thing we're trying to avoid, hurt, is also the thing we have to risk if we want love. There's no way around it. Intimacy requires exposure. It requires letting someone close enough that they could wound you, trusting that they won't, and knowing that even if they do, you'll survive it. That's not weakness. That's the greatest strength there is. The mask of indifference might keep you safe, but it also keeps you small. It narrows the range of your experience. And while it might protect you from the lows, it also robs you of the highs, because the joy of connection, the comfort of being known, the thrill of being loved fully, all of that exists only on the other side of risk. So yes, indifference can look appealing. It can look like control, like power, like stability. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the echo of what's really underneath. Fear, longing, the hope that maybe one day it will feel safe to care again. And when you recognize that, the illusion fades. You stop confusing distance for strength, and you start to see it for what it is, self-P protection. And maybe that's the turning point. Not to shame yourself for protecting your heart, not to shame others for doing the same, but to understand it. To have compassion for the fact that detachment often comes from pain. And then from that place of compassion, to make a choice. Do I want to live behind the walls I built? Or do I want to risk taking them down brick by brick for the chance at something real? Because in the end, the mask of indifference is just that, a mask. Underneath it, there's always someone who cares more than they're willing to admit. Someone who longs for connection even as they keep it at bay. Someone who, given the right conditions, might be brave enough to try again. And when that happens, when protection gives way to presence, that's when true intimacy begins. So, do women prefer men who don't care? The answer is not truly. What they do prefer is a man who cares well and who doesn't need to prove he does. A man who's emotionally present yet grounded, who doesn't withhold connection, but offers it thoughtfully. Because true attraction is not about indifference. It's about the quiet strength to care without smothering, to open without fear, and to show up not by trying too hard, but by being enough.